They say love is blind, but in Sarah's case, divorce was what finally opened her eyes. While her husband laughed at her defeat, certain she'd end up on the streets penniless, Sarah was descending into a world the city had forgotten for decades. Alone with just a cat and the weight of humiliation, she transformed a dark, abandoned subway tunnel into something no luxury architect could imagine. But what she found hidden behind those rusted metal walls wasn't just a roof over her head. It was the secret weapon that would destroy the empire of the man who tried to erase her. If you love seeing the moment when justice finally catches up with those who thought they were untouchable, subscribe and stay until the end. You won't believe what her ex-husband discovered when he finally tried to locate her 3 months later. If you believe that those who destroy others eventually face their own reckoning, hit that subscribe button. Here we share stories of poetic justice that prove karma is patient but never forgets. Like this video so it reaches someone who needs to remember that being knocked down is not the same as being knocked out. Because what Sarah built in the darkness wasn't just survival. It was a masterclass in turning your enemy's cruelty into your greatest advantage. Sarah Mitchell stood on the sidewalk outside what had been her home for 23 years and watched a locksmith install new deadbolts on the front door. Her front door. Except it wasn't hers anymore. The divorce had been finalized 3 days ago, and despite 23 years of marriage, despite having put her own career on hold to support Robert's business ambitions, despite everything, Sarah had walked away with almost nothing. Robert's lawyers had been expensive, ruthless, and creative. They'd proven that the house was purchased solely in Robert's name before the marriage. They'd shown that his business assets were protected in trusts Sarah had never known existed. They'd documented her lack of contribution to household income over the past decade. The settlement gave Sarah exactly $60,000 and 30 days to vacate the premises. Robert got the house worth $8 million. The vacation property, the investment portfolio, and the satisfaction of watching his 52-year-old ex-wife reduced to poverty. Now, as Sarah stood on the sidewalk with her single suitcase and cat carrier containing Mina, her black cat and only companion, she watched Robert emerge from the house with a woman half his age draped on his arm. "All finished?" Robert called to the locksmith. "Yes, sir. New locks throughout. Here are your keys." Robert accepted them with a smile, then noticed Sarah still standing there. His smile widened. "Still here, Sarah? I thought you'd have left by now. Don't you have somewhere to be?" Sarah said nothing, just stood there, dignified despite the humiliation, holding Mina's carrier. "Oh, that's right," Robert continued, loud enough for the neighbors who were definitely watching. "You don't have anywhere to go, do you? No job, no savings, no friends who aren't tired of your complaining. What was it your lawyer said? Unemployable at your age with no recent work history. That was it, wasn't it?" One of the neighbors, Mrs. Chen from across the street, was openly staring now. Sarah felt her cheeks burn. "The settlement money should last you a few months if you're careful," Robert said. "Maybe find a nice efficiency apartment. Get a roommate. Learn to live within your means." He laughed. "Who knows? Maybe losing everything will teach you some life skills you clearly never developed." His girlfriend giggled. Sarah recognized her. Amber, one of Robert's junior associates, 28 years old, and completely unaware that Robert would discard her just as easily once someone younger came along. "Robert," Sarah said quietly. It was the first word she'd spoken. "The divorce isn't over." "Oh, sweetheart," Robert said with mock sympathy. "The divorce is absolutely over. The papers are signed. The settlement is final. You lost. Accept it." "We'll see," Sarah said. Robert's expression hardened. "Don't threaten me. Don't contact me. Don't try to fight this. My lawyers will crush anything you try, and the only thing you'll accomplish is wasting what little money you have. Now get off my property before I call the police for trespassing." Sarah picked up her suitcase in one hand and Mina's carrier in the other. She walked down the sidewalk with her head high, past the staring neighbors, past her former life, toward what? She had $60,000 in a bank account. She had a suitcase of clothes. She had a cat. And she had nowhere to live in a city where a studio apartment cost $3,000 a month. The math was simple and brutal. Her settlement money would last maybe 18 months if she was frugal. Then what? At 52, with no recent employment history, no references Robert hadn't poisoned, and no network except the society wives who'd already dropped her the moment the divorce papers were filed. Sarah walked for hours, her suitcase growing heavier with each block. She'd tried calling friends earlier in the week. They'd all been busy. She'd tried reaching out to former colleagues from before she'd quit her job to support Robert. They'd all moved on, didn't remember her or weren't hiring. By evening, Sarah found herself in a part of the city she rarely visited, the old financial district where buildings from the 1920s stood alongside modern skyscrapers. The sidewalks were mostly empty after business hours. She sat on a bench, exhausted, and opened Mina's carrier to give her cat some air. Mina purred and rubbed against her hand, the only creature who still offered unconditional affection. "We're in trouble, girl," Sarah whispered. "I don't know what we're going to do." As the sun set, Sarah noticed something she'd never paid attention to before, a metal grate in the sidewalk near the old Merchants and Trust Bank building. It was rusted, overgrown with weeds at the edges and barely visible, but there was something about it, a faded sign, barely legible. Metropolitan Transit Authority, Service Entrance, Authorized Personnel Only, 1932. Sarah remembered reading somewhere that the city had dozens of abandoned subway stations, closed since the 1940s, when the transit system was modernized. Stations that still existed beneath the streets, forgotten and sealed off. This grate looked like it hadn't been opened in decades, but as Sarah examined it closer, she noticed that the padlock securing it was so rusted it had nearly disintegrated. She looked around. The street was empty. It was nearly dark. And Sarah made a decision born of desperation. She'd check if the grate could open, just to see, just to know if there was a space below where she could at least spend one night while she figured out a real plan. The padlock broke apart with minimal pressure. The grate was heavy, but Sarah managed to lift it enough to peer down. Concrete steps descended into darkness. Cool air rose from below, carrying the faint smell of earth and old metal. Sarah looked at Mina. "This is crazy, isn't it?" Mina meowed. "Yeah, I think so too, but what choice do we have?" Sarah retrieved a small flashlight from her purse. She'd always carried one, a habit from her practical upbringing. She grabbed her suitcase and cat carrier and descended into the unknown. The stairs went down approximately 20 feet. Sarah counted 32 steps. The flashlight beam barely penetrated the darkness, but it showed concrete walls lined with white tile, cracked and dirty, but still intact. At the bottom of the stairs, Sarah found herself in a corridor. The ceiling was arched, maybe 8 feet high, also tiled in white. The floor was concrete, dusty but dry, and ahead, the corridor opened into a larger space. Sarah moved forward carefully, testing each step. The air was cool but not cold, dry despite being underground, and most remarkably, it was silent. Completely silent except for Sarah's footsteps and Mina's occasional meow. The larger space turned out to be a subway platform. Sarah's flashlight revealed an extraordinary sight, a perfectly preserved 1930s transit station, frozen in time. The platform was about 200 feet long and 20 feet wide. White tile covered every surface. Walls, ceiling, support columns. Brass light fixtures hung from the ceiling, their bulbs long dead, but the fixtures themselves still elegant. Advertising boards from the 1940s still hung on the walls, promoting products that no longer existed. At the far end, Sarah could see the tunnel where trains had once run, and to her right a small room with a door marked Station Manager. Sarah set down her suitcase and carrier, let Mina out to explore, and examined the space more carefully. The platform was dirty with decades of dust, but structurally it appeared sound. No water damage she could see, no obvious structural cracks. The tiles were cracked in places, but still attached to the walls. And, most incredibly, she could faintly hear the rumble of modern subway trains passing through nearby tunnels. The city's current transit system ran close by, but this abandoned station wasn't connected to it anymore. This was a ghost station, sealed off and forgotten when the city had reconfigured the subway lines sometime in the 1940s or 50s. Sarah walked the length of the platform. At the far end, she found another door. This one led to what appeared to be utility rooms. One contained old equipment, rusted and useless, but another room was completely empty, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, with the same white tile walls and a single brass light fixture on the ceiling. This room was dry, clean relatively speaking, and private. It had a door that closed, and when Sarah stood in its center and listened, she heard nothing except her own breathing. For the first time in months, maybe years, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm. This place was hers, at least for tonight. No one knew about it. No one could take it from her. Down here, Robert's cruelty couldn't reach her. Sarah returned to the platform, gathered her belongings and carried them to the small room. She opened her suitcase and pulled out clothes to make a bed on the floor. It wasn't comfortable, but it was no worse than the cheap hotel she'd considered and couldn't really afford. Mina explored the space, sniffing every corner, then settled onto Sarah's makeshift bed with a contented purr. "I think she approves," Sarah said to herself, then laughed at the absurdity. She was living in an abandoned subway tunnel, talking to her cat, and somehow feeling more at peace than she had in her mansion. That night Sarah slept surprisingly well. The darkness was complete, the silence profound. And when she woke in the morning with her flashlight battery dying, she made another decision. She wasn't leaving. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because above ground, she was Sarah Mitchell, the pathetic divorcee who'd lost everything. But down here, in this forgotten space beneath the city, she was simply Sarah, and she was free. Sarah woke to complete darkness and a moment of panic before remembering where she was. Her flashlight was dead. She'd slept for how long? Hours, certainly. Maybe longer. Underground, there was no way to tell time. She fumbled for her phone. 6:47 a.m. She'd slept nearly 10 hours, the best sleep she'd had in months. Mina was curled against her side, warm and purring. Sarah stroked her cat's fur and took stock of her situation. She was living in an abandoned subway station. That was insane, but also weirdly practical. She had shelter, solid shelter with a roof and walls and a door that locked from the inside. The space was dry and structurally sound. She wasn't paying rent, and no one knew she was here. The downsides were obvious: no electricity, no running water, no bathroom facilities, no heat beyond the natural temperature underground, and the constant risk of discovery. But Sarah had $60,000 and no prospect of stable income. If she spent $3,000 a month on rent, she'd be broke in 20 months. If she lived here and used the money only for food and necessities, it could last years. Long enough to figure out a real plan, long enough to maybe find a way to rebuild. Sarah made her decision. She'd stay, at least for now, at least until she had a better option. She spent that first full day establishing systems. First, she found her way back to the surface. The grate opened from below using a simple lever mechanism. She emerged in early morning when the street was mostly empty, replaced the grate carefully, and went to explore the neighborhood. She found a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away with a bathroom. She bought coffee and used their facilities to clean up. She found a laundromat 2 blocks in the other direction, a public library with bathrooms and electrical outlets 4 blocks away, a small grocery store that stayed open late. Everything she needed was within walking distance of her underground home. Sarah bought supplies: battery-powered LED lanterns, rechargeable batteries, a portable phone charger, water bottles, non-perishable food, cleaning supplies, cat food and litter, and a small camping stove. She spent $200 that first day, but she saved $3,000 in rent. Over the next week, Sarah established a routine. She'd wake early, emerge before the neighborhood was busy, use the diner's bathroom, spend the day in the library or exploring the city, and return underground at night, when darkness made her arrival less noticeable. She began cleaning her small room. The dust came up easily, decades of accumulated grime that just needed sweeping and wiping. Under the dirt, the tile was still white, beautiful even, with an Art Deco pattern that must have been elegant when the station was new. She found old newspapers in one of the utility rooms, pages from the 1940s and 50s, yellowed but readable. She used them as drop cloths while she cleaned, then read them at night by lantern light. They were fascinating, a window into the city's past, into the people who'd once walked through this station on their way to work or home. Mina thrived underground. The station was full of interesting spaces to explore, and within days, she'd established a territory. She hunted the occasional mouse that wandered in from the tunnels, keeping the space free of pests. She seemed perfectly content with their strange new home. By the end of the second week, Sarah had transformed her small room into something almost comfortable. She'd found a discarded mattress behind a furniture store, not great but serviceable after a thorough cleaning. She'd acquired blankets, a pillow, and even a small rug from a thrift store. The room was starting to feel less like a shelter and more like a home, a weird, underground, secret home, but hers. Sarah also began to explore the rest of the station. The platform itself was extraordinary, 200 feet of pristine 1930s architecture. The white tiles, the brass fixtures, the vintage advertisements. It was like a museum that no one knew existed. She found the old station maps in the manager's office, dusty but intact. This had been the merchant station, serving the financial district. It had been closed in 1952 when the city had reconfigured the transit lines to bypass this section. The tunnel extended in both directions from the platform. Sarah explored cautiously, never going far enough to lose sight of the platform. But she could see that the tunnels were intact, leading to connections with other abandoned stations, an entire forgotten world beneath the city. 3 weeks after moving underground, Sarah sat on the platform one evening, Mina in her lap, and realized something remarkable. She was happy, not despite living in a subway tunnel, but because of it. She'd had time to think, to read, to exist without judgment or pressure. She'd had space to grieve her marriage and let go of the life that had been taken from her. Down here, she wasn't a failure. She was a survivor, and she was just getting started. 1 month into living underground, Sarah faced her first major challenge: water. She'd been buying bottled water, but it was expensive and wasteful. She needed a sustainable solution. So Sarah began to study her environment with an engineer's eye. The tunnel was cool and humid, water condensed on the pipes that ran along the ceiling, old steam pipes from the building above, long disconnected but still conducting moisture from the ground above. Every morning, water droplets formed on the pipes and dripped onto the platform. Sarah had an idea. She positioned clean containers beneath the drip points. Over 24 hours, she collected nearly 2 gallons of water. It needed filtering. She wasn't going to risk drinking contaminated water, but the volume was promising. She bought a portable water filter designed for camping, the kind that removed bacteria and particulates. She set up a system: collect condensation water, filter it through increasingly fine screens to remove sediment, then through the portable filter for safety. The result was clean, drinkable water at no ongoing cost. For washing, she created a different system using a camping shower bag that she could heat using her portable stove. It wasn't luxurious, but it worked. The next challenge was lighting. Battery-powered lanterns required constant battery replacement, which was expensive. Sarah needed something more sustainable. She started spending time in the public library, reading about alternative energy and electrical systems. She learned about solar panels, battery systems, and LED efficiency. Then she designed a plan. During the day, Sarah would go to the library with several power banks and rechargeable batteries. She'd plug them into outlets while she read or used the computers. The library staff never noticed or cared. People charged phones there all the time. In the evening, she'd return underground with fully charged batteries. These powered LED light strips she'd installed along the walls and ceiling of her room and parts of the platform. LEDs were so efficient that a single power bank could light her space for days. She created a charging schedule. 8 power banks rotated between the library and the tunnel. She'd carry 2 each day, charge them, and always have 6 ready underground. The system cost her nothing except the initial investment in equipment. Next, she tackled food storage. The tunnel was naturally cool, around 60 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, but she needed actual refrigeration for perishables. She couldn't afford a mini-fridge, and even if she could, she had no way to power it. Instead, Sarah created an evaporative cooling system using techniques she'd read about. She constructed a box covered in wet cloth, positioned in a spot where air circulation was good. As the water evaporated, it cooled the interior by several degrees. It wasn't a refrigerator, but it kept food fresher longer. She also began to notice patterns in what stores and restaurants threw away. Bakeries discarded day-old bread. Grocery stores tossed produce with minor blemishes. Coffee shops threw out pastries at closing. None of it was trash. It was perfectly good food being wasted. Sarah overcame her pride and began rescuing this food. She'd wait until stores closed, then retrieve items from their dumpsters. It felt humiliating at first, but she quickly realized she was being smart, not desperate. She was reducing waste and feeding herself sustainably. Within 6 weeks of living underground, Sarah had achieved something remarkable. She was spending less than $500 a month on all expenses. Her settlement money, instead of running out in 20 months, could now last for 10 years if needed. But more than the financial sustainability, Sarah had discovered something about herself. She was capable, more capable than she'd ever realized. All those years supporting Robert, managing the household, organizing their social life, she'd been developing skills, problem-solving skills, engineering skills, creative thinking skills. Robert had called her unemployable and lacking life skills, but he'd been wrong. Sarah had incredible life skills. She'd just never had to use them to their fullest potential. Now, as she sat in her increasingly comfortable underground room, surrounded by the systems she'd built, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment she'd never experienced before. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving, and she was about to make her space even more extraordinary. 2 months after descending into the tunnel, Sarah transformed her abandoned subway station into something that would make design magazines weep with envy. It started with the tiles. Sarah had been cleaning them gradually, section by section. As the decades of grime came away, the beauty underneath was revealed: intricate white subway tiles with Art Deco patterns in emerald green and gold. The original designers had created something beautiful, meant to make commuters' days brighter. Now Sarah was restoring it. She worked methodically, spending hours each day scrubbing tiles with cleaning solution and old toothbrushes. It was meditation more than work, and slowly, magnificently, the station came back to life. The platform became her primary living space. Sarah brought down furniture piece by piece, items she found on the street marked free or at the curb on trash day. A wealthy city produced enormous waste, and Sarah became an expert at recognizing quality among the discarded. She found a beautiful mid-century modern couch, leather-worn but still elegant. It just needed cleaning. She found an Art Deco side table that matched the station's aesthetic perfectly. An oriental rug, slightly faded but still gorgeous. A brass floor lamp that needed rewiring but was otherwise perfect. She found books, boxes of them left outside a closing bookstore, classic literature, art books, novels. She created a library along one wall of the platform, books arranged on shelving she'd constructed from reclaimed wood. She found art, paintings and prints that people had discarded during moves or renovations. None were masterpieces, but all were beautiful. She hung them on the walls, creating a gallery in the tunnel. The transformation was astonishing. The platform that had been dark and forgotten became a loft-style living space that mixed 1930s elegance with modern salvaged luxury. The white and green tiles gleamed. The brass fixtures, which Sarah had polished, caught the LED light and glowed warmly. The furniture created conversation areas and reading nooks. Sarah's small room became her bedroom, furnished with the mattress she'd found, now covered in linens from a thrift store. She'd added a bookshelf, a small desk, and even a mirror she'd salvaged and reframed. The station manager's office became her study, a place to read, think, and plan. She'd furnished it with a desk, chair, and filing cabinet. She'd hung curtains over the doorway for privacy. The empty utility room became storage for food and supplies, organized with shelves and containers. 3 months in, Sarah's underground home was genuinely beautiful, eccentric certainly, unconventional absolutely, but beautiful in a way that her expensive mansion never had been, because this space was entirely hers. Every choice, every item, every detail reflected her taste and creativity rather than Robert's demands or society's expectations. Sarah began photographing the space with her phone, not to show anyone but to document the transformation. Looking at the photos, she could hardly believe this was the same dusty, abandoned platform she'd descended into months ago. She also started writing. She'd always enjoyed writing but had set it aside during her marriage. Now, with time and solitude, she began journaling. She wrote about her experience, about the process of creating beauty from abandonment, about discovering capability in crisis. One evening, as Sarah sat on her salvaged couch, Mina curled beside her, reading by lamplight in her underground palace, she heard something that made her freeze, a door creaking not above ground, below in the tunnel. Sarah extinguished her lights immediately and sat in absolute darkness, heart pounding. Mina sensed the tension and went still. Footsteps. Slow, cautious, approaching from the tunnel. Sarah's mind raced. She'd been here 3 months without discovery. Had someone finally found her secret? A light appeared in the tunnel, a flashlight beam sweeping the platform. Sarah remained motionless, hidden behind her couch in the darkness. The light settled on her space, on the furniture, the books, the obviously inhabited area. Then a voice, male, surprised. "What the hell?" The flashlight moved closer. Sarah could see the silhouette now, a man in a utility uniform with a transit authority badge. She was caught. It was over. Sarah stood slowly, raising her hands in a non-threatening gesture. "Please, I can explain." The transit worker, young, maybe 30, with genuine shock on his face, stared at her, then at the space she'd created, then back at her. "You're living here? In the old merchant station?" "Yes." Sarah admitted. There was no point lying. I'm sorry. I know I'm trespassing. Fell leave. Just please don't call the police. The worker lowered his flashlight so it wasn't shining in her eyes. How long have you been here? 3 months. 3 months. He looked around again, taking in the furnished platform, the cleaned tiles, the obvious care Sarah had put into the space. I don't even know what to say. This is incredible. Sarah blinked. You're not going to arrest me? I'm not a cop. I'm just a maintenance worker checking the old tunnels for structural issues. He walked onto the platform, examining everything. Nobody's been down here officially in decades. We just do safety checks every few years to make sure the old stations aren't going to collapse into active tunnels. And are they going to collapse? Not this one. Structure's solid. He touched one of the cleaned tile walls. You did all this? The cleaning? The furniture? Sarah nodded. The worker, his name tag read Miguel, shook his head in wonder. I've been doing this job for 8 years. I've seen every abandoned station in the system. Most are trash heaps, dangerous, flooded. But this, he gestured at the space. This is like someone created an underground loft. It's actually beautiful. Thank you, Sarah said quietly. Miguel studied her carefully. Why are you living down here? Are you in trouble? Running from something? Sarah hesitated, then decided honesty was her only option. She told him, briefly, about the divorce, the settlement, the humiliation, the discovery of the tunnel. Miguel listened without judgment. When she finished, he said, I should report this. Technically, you're trespassing on transit authority property. I know, Sarah said. I understand. I'll pack up and be gone by tomorrow. But, Miguel continued, technically, I'm only required to report safety hazards. And you're clearly not a safety hazard. You've actually improved the property. He smiled. So, I'm going to file a report saying the merchant station is structurally sound and requires no immediate action, and I'm going to forget I saw you. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. Why would you do that? Because my mother was divorced by my father after 30 years, left her with nothing. She struggled for years before getting back on her feet. I know what that looks like. He pulled out a card and handed it to her. That's my number. If you ever have a structural issue, or if anyone else from transit shows up, call me. I'll help however I can. Thank you, Miguel. You have no idea what this means. Good luck, he said. And seriously, this space is amazing. You've got talent. After he left, Sarah sat in the darkness for a long time, processing what had just happened. She'd been prepared to lose everything again. Instead, she'd found an unexpected ally. The next day, energized by her narrow escape and Miguel's kindness, Sarah decided to tackle a project she'd been avoiding, fixing a water leak in the far utility room. Water was seeping through a crack in the wall, not enough to flood, but enough to create dampness. Sarah had been meaning to seal it, but hadn't had the right materials. She examined the wall carefully. The leak was behind a metal panel that looked like it had been installed in the 1940s or 50s, much newer than the rest of the station's 1930s construction. Sarah found tools in her collection of salvaged items: a screwdriver, pry bar, hammer. She worked at the panel's edges until she could get leverage. It resisted, rusted in place, but finally gave way. Behind the panel was a cavity in the wall, and in that cavity was a metal door, a vault door, maybe 3 feet square, with a combination lock. Sarah's heart raced. She pulled away more of the panel, revealing the full vault. It was embedded in the wall, clearly installed when the bank above was still operational, the Merchants and Trust Bank, which had closed in the 1970s. This was a bank vault, and judging by its location and the fact that it had been hidden behind a panel, it was probably a vault no one remembered existed. Sarah tried the handle. Locked, of course. The combination dial was old, mechanical. She had no way to open it. She sat back staring at the vault, her mind spinning. What was inside? Old records, money, nothing? For 2 weeks, Sarah researched. She spent her days in the library, reading about the Merchants and Trust Bank. She learned it had been a mid-sized financial institution that had failed in 1973 during a banking crisis. Its assets had been sold off, its records supposedly transferred to the acquiring bank. But what if some records hadn't been transferred? What if this vault contained files that had been forgotten, sealed away and lost? Sarah also researched vault cracking. She learned it was nearly impossible for an amateur. These old mechanical locks were sophisticated, but she also learned that sometimes old vaults could be opened if you knew the default factory combinations that were common in that era. She found a list of common combinations used by major vault manufacturers in the 1930s, 1950s. There were hundreds, but she had time. Every evening, Sarah tried combinations, methodically, patiently, writing down each one she'd attempted. On the 63rd attempt, the vault opened. Inside were metal file boxes stacked neatly. Sarah pulled out the first one and opened it. Papers, financial records, ledgers, all from the 1970s, from the Merchants and Trust Bank. And as Sarah began reading, she realized what she'd found. Evidence of massive financial fraud, tax evasion schemes, offshore account records, lists of wealthy clients who'd used the bank's services to hide money from authorities. Sarah's hands trembled as she pulled out more boxes. There were dozens of them, years of records documenting illegal financial activity. And on one of the client lists, highlighted in a bank manager's notes as high priority, maintain discretion, was a name Sarah recognized instantly. Robert Mitchell, her ex-husband. Sarah spent 3 days reading every document in the vault. The more she read, the more her shock turned to cold, calculated fury. Robert hadn't just been wealthy from his legitimate business. He'd been hiding money offshore since the early 2000s, long before their divorce, throughout their marriage. Millions of dollars funneled through the Merchants and Trust Bank and other institutions to accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Luxembourg. The records showed transactions totaling over $15 million moved offshore between 2002 and 2012. And based on the documentation, none of it had been reported to tax authorities. Robert had committed massive tax fraud, and during the divorce he'd claimed he had limited assets, forcing Sarah to accept a tiny settlement. Meanwhile, he'd been sitting on $15 million in hidden money. Sarah photographed every document, thousands of pages methodically organized. She created digital copies and stored them in multiple secure cloud accounts. Then she researched. She needed to understand exactly how to use this information. She spent weeks in the library, reading about tax fraud, divorce fraud, criminal financial reporting. She consulted legal databases available to the public. She learned the procedures for reporting financial crimes anonymously. She also contacted a lawyer, not in person, but through an encrypted email service. She explained her situation hypothetically. If someone discovered evidence of tax fraud by their ex-spouse, what would be the legal implications for a divorce settlement? The lawyer's response was clear. Divorce settlements based on fraudulent financial disclosure could be reopened. Assets hidden from both the spouse and tax authorities could be seized, with a portion potentially awarded to the defrauded spouse, and the person who committed the fraud could face criminal charges. Sarah had everything she needed, but she was patient. She waited until the timing was perfect. 4 months after finding the vault, Sarah sent her first anonymous package. It went to the Internal Revenue Service, addressed to their Fraud Investigation Division. Inside were copies of Robert's offshore account records, the bank documents showing transfers, and a detailed timeline of his financial movements. The package included a note. Robert Mitchell has evaded approximately $4.2 million in federal taxes over a 10-year period. Evidence enclosed. A concerned citizen. 1 week later, she sent a second package to the state tax authority with similar documentation. 1 week after that, she sent a package to her divorce attorney with a note. You represented me in Mitchell versus Mitchell. Your client, me, was defrauded. Robert Mitchell hid $15 million in offshore accounts during our marriage and divorce. Evidence enclosed. My settlement was based on fraudulent financial disclosure, filed to reopen immediately. And finally, she sent a package to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District, where financial crimes were prosecuted. This package included everything, the full scope of Robert's fraud documented in detail. Then Sarah waited. The response took 6 weeks, but when it came, it was spectacular. Sarah learned about it from news reports. She was in the library using a computer when a headline caught her eye. Local businessman arrested in major tax fraud case. The article detailed federal charges against Robert Mitchell for tax evasion, fraud, and financial crimes spanning more than a decade. Federal agents had raided his offices and home. His bank accounts had been frozen. He was facing up to 20 years in prison and millions in fines and back taxes. The article included a quote from Robert's lawyer. Mr. Mitchell maintains his innocence and believes this is a case of mistaken identity or falsified documents. Sarah smiled. The documents weren't false. They were bank records, authenticated, dated, irrefutable. 2 days later, Sarah's divorce attorney called her. She'd given him her phone number months ago but had never heard from him. Sarah, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Around. What's going on? I've filed to reopen your divorce case based on fraudulent financial disclosure. The evidence you provided is extraordinary. Where did you get it? I'd prefer not to say. Well, it doesn't matter. What matters is that we have documented proof that Robert hid $15 million during your marriage and divorce. The settlement you accepted was based on fraudulent information. We're going to destroy that settlement and get you what you're actually owed, which is, conservatively, half of the marital assets, which includes the hidden money. We're talking $7 to $8 million, Sarah. Plus, because he committed fraud, we're going for additional damages. You could walk away with $10 million. Sarah felt dizzy. $10 million? Probably more. His legitimate business assets are also on the table now. The house, the investments, everything. He tried to cheat you. Now he's going to pay. Over the next 3 months, Sarah watched Robert's empire collapse. The federal investigation expanded. The IRS seized his offshore accounts. The divorce case was reopened, and Robert's fraudulent disclosure was exposed in court. Robert tried to fight. His expensive lawyers argued and delayed, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records don't lie. The divorce settlement was voided. New proceedings began, and this time, Sarah had the power. She negotiated through her attorney, never appearing in person. She was entitled to half of all marital assets, including the previously hidden offshore money. She was entitled to the house. She was entitled to compensation for Robert's fraud. The final settlement awarded Sarah $8, $2 million in cash and assets, plus the house worth $2.8 million. Robert's total net worth was reduced to approximately $3 million, most of which would be consumed by legal fees, fines, and back taxes. He destroyed her with cruelty and fraud. Now he was the one destroyed. And Sarah, living in her underground palace reading about his downfall in the newspaper, felt something she hadn't felt in years: justice. 6 months after sending the first package, Sarah stood in front of the Merchants and Trust Bank building, now renovated luxury condos, and made a phone call. "Mr. Torres, this is Sarah Mitchell. I'm calling about the property we discussed." Eduardo Torres was a city official responsible for unused municipal properties. Sarah had contacted him 3 weeks earlier with an unusual proposal. "Ms. Mitchell, yes, I have good news. The City Council approved your proposal. You can purchase the merchant station for the amount we discussed." Sarah smiled. "Excellent. I'll have my attorney wire the funds today." The amount was $2.1 million, a fortune for an abandoned subway station, but Sarah had leverage. She documented the station's historical significance, its architectural beauty, and her vision for its future. She'd also quietly let slip that if the city didn't sell to her, she had evidence of illegal waste dumping in some of the other abandoned stations that could become a PR nightmare. The city was happy to sell. With the purchase, Sarah would own the station legally. She could live there without fear, and she could implement the bigger plan she'd been developing. 2 weeks later, the paperwork was complete. Sarah owned the merchant station and the tunnels immediately connected to it. She had $6 million left from her settlement after the purchase and legal fees. She hired architects and contractors. She showed them her space and explained her vision: transform the abandoned station into a cultural center. The platform would become a performance space for music, theater, and art. The utility rooms would become studio spaces for artists. The tunnels would become gallery spaces. The architects were entranced. "This is incredible. The bones are perfect. With proper permits and some structural updates, this could be extraordinary." Sarah invested $3 million in renovations. They installed proper electrical, plumbing, ventilation. They restored the tile work professionally. They added safety features and accessibility modifications. They created a discreet entrance that connected to the building above, which Sarah purchased for another $1 million. 9 months after finding the vault, the Merchants Cultural Center opened to the public. The response was overwhelming. The space was featured in architecture magazines as a triumph of adaptive reuse. Artists competed for studio space. Musicians booked the performance platform months in advance. The gallery tunnels hosted rotating exhibitions. And Sarah, who'd been called unemployable and useless, became the director and owner of one of the city's most innovative cultural spaces. She gave interviews occasionally, always carefully. She told the story of finding the abandoned station and seeing its potential, but she never mentioned living there homeless. She never mentioned the vault or the documents. Those secrets remained hers. The cultural center generated modest revenue, enough to cover costs and pay a small staff. Sarah didn't need the income. She had $2 million left from her settlement, invested conservatively, providing more than enough to live on. She'd also purchased a small apartment above the cultural center, legitimate legal housing, but she spent most of her time in the station, in the small room that had been her first home underground. She'd kept it exactly as it was, a reminder of where she'd started. 1 year after her divorce, Sarah received a message through her lawyer. Robert wanted to see her. He was facing trial, likely to be convicted, possibly going to prison. He wanted to apologize. Sarah considered the request for exactly 10 seconds before responding. No. She didn't need his apology, didn't care about his regrets. He'd served his purpose in her story as the catalyst for her transformation. Now he was irrelevant. 2 years after her divorce, Sarah sat in her underground palace, now legally hers, renovated and beautiful, and wrote an article for a major magazine. It was titled, "The Tunnel, How I Found Home in the Last Place Anyone Would Look." She wrote honestly about losing everything, about descending into darkness, about building a life from scraps. She wrote about the vault, about finding the evidence that changed everything. She wrote about justice and creativity, and the unexpected beauty of abandoned places. The article went viral. Sarah received thousands of messages from people who'd been discarded, divorced, dismissed. They all said the same thing: "Your story gave me hope." Sarah responded to as many as she could. She told them all the same thing: "You're not finished, you're just beginning. Find your tunnel, build your palace, and remember, the people who throw you away are often sitting on secrets. Be patient, be smart, and when the time comes, be merciless in pursuing what's rightfully yours." 3 years after her divorce, Sarah stood on the platform of the Merchants Cultural Center during a performance, a string quartet playing Beethoven, in the beautiful tile-lined space she'd restored from abandonment. Mina sat beside her, older now, but still her constant companion. The audience filled the platform, hundreds of people who'd discovered this hidden gem beneath the city. And Sarah thought about Robert, who at that moment was serving year 2 of a 7-year prison sentence for tax fraud. He'd thought he'd destroyed her, thought he'd left her with nothing, thought she'd end up broken and begging. Instead, she'd found a forgotten world and made it beautiful. She'd discovered his secrets and used them to reclaim her life. She'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into something extraordinary. She'd been thrown away, and in the darkness where she'd landed, she'd found everything she needed to fly. If Sarah's story moved you, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. We share powerful stories every week about people who turned their darkest moments into their greatest victories. Leave a comment below. Have you ever been betrayed or discarded? Have you ever discovered hidden strength in your worst moment? Share your story. Someone reading might need your inspiration today. Sarah teaches us profound truths about resilience, justice, and the power of patience. She teaches us that rock bottom can be a foundation. When Sarah descended into that abandoned tunnel with nothing but a cat and a suitcase, she wasn't falling. She was finding the solid ground she needed to rebuild. Sometimes losing everything means losing everything that was holding you back. She teaches us that creativity is survival. Sarah didn't just exist underground. She thrived by solving problems with ingenuity. Water collection, lighting systems, furniture salvage, space transformation. She proved that intelligence and creativity are worth more than money. Most importantly, Sarah teaches us that justice requires patience. She could have exposed Robert immediately, but she waited. She documented everything. She timed her revelations perfectly. And when she struck, it was with precision that destroyed him completely while securing her own future. For anyone who's been betrayed, discarded, or told they're worthless, remember Sarah. Remember that the people who throw you away often have secrets. Remember that patience, documentation, and strategic thinking can turn your enemy's cruelty into your greatest advantage. Thank you for joining us for Sarah's incredible journey from betrayal to triumph. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that being underground doesn't mean being defeated. Sometimes it means you've found the secret vault. We'll see you in the next story.